Welcome, Soul Family, to another episode of Awaken with Carla, podcast that empowers you to awaken your mind, nurture your body, heal your heart, and nourish your soul. I'm your host, Carla, and I'm so thrilled to have you here with me today. As you know, in each episode, we explore the realms of health, wellness, spirituality, mindset, and manifestations, all with the intention to guide you towards unlocking your highest potential. Together, we'll embark on a transformational journey of self-discovery where we'll gain practical tools, inspiring insights, and personal stories that will inspire you to create positive changes in your life. Now, before we dive into today's episode, I wanted to take a moment to express my gratitude to all of you amazing listeners. Your support and enthusiasm for this podcast has been truly heartwarming. It's incredible to see this community growing and thriving, and I'm honored to be a part of this journey. As you know, one of the things that makes Awaken with Carla so special is the opportunity that we have to learn from incredible guest speakers who are experts in their respective field. Their wisdom and experience brings a wealth of knowledge to each episode, inspiring us all to live our best lives. So, without further ado, let's get started with today's episode. And I'm delighted to introduce our guest speaker, Liz Keats. Liz is a certified international life purpose and spirituality coach. She lives in the beautiful East Sussex in England. She's a lifelong learner, mindfulness teacher, sound healer, and world traveler who loves Mama Nature. Liz loves to help women to own their power and live purposeful, soul-led lives. I had the privilege to dive deep into this fascinating conversation with Liz, and I hope that you find this information as insightful as I have. In this episode, we're going to explore what it means to go from a life shock to having a life shift. Liz shares her unique perspective, her own personal story, as well as some practical tools that can help you to transform your life in profound ways, especially if you're going through a major life shift. Whether you're seeking guidance on physical health, emotional well-being, spiritual awakening, or aligning your mindset for success, you're in the right place. Our intention is to provide you with the tools and inspiration you need to create a life filled with abundance, purpose, and meaning. So get ready to ignite your curiosity, expand your consciousness, and awaken the extraordinary that lies within you. Let's dive into today's episode of Awaken with Carla. Thank you for joining me again on this incredible journey. And remember that the power to transform lies within you. Quick reminder before we jump in. If you enjoy this episode, please be sure to like, share, subscribe, or download the episode, depending on wherever you're listening to this. So let's dive right in. Hello, welcome, Liz. Thank you so much for being here today. How are you?
Oh, thank you so much for inviting me. And I feel excited to be here. Slightly nervous, but excited. And I'm good. Thank you.
Yes, well, I'm so happy to have you here today. I know one of the things you and I chatted about was sort of this idea and this concept of, going through a major life shock or a major sort of crisis or event in our life, which eventually or inevitably leads to creating major shifts or major transformation in your life. And so I wanted to spend some time chatting with you a little bit about that today, and really wanted to, get your story and hear your story with sort of that experience, because I know that we both mentioned that was one of the things that you've experienced in your life. And I can certainly say that I've had similar, hey, we each have our own versions of the story, but a similar situation in my life where, I had a major event that sort of propelled me into, shifting and transforming my life into something completely different from where I was. So I'd like to start off just by hearing a little bit more about your experience and your situation. And yeah, so if you don't mind sharing with us today.
Age 43, 2015, I was living in London and living with my husband, working as a therapist and a counsellor, working for an organisation, working a little bit private practice. And as it happens, out of the blue, I was diagnosed with breast cancer, a rare form of breast cancer. So that was my massive life shock. There were things in the background at the time that I felt that change was afoot, and I didn't really know what it was, but I think that was my unconscious mind trying to communicate something. I was certainly very stressed in my life at the time, for various reasons around work. I love the work, but I'd been working for a big organisation for a lot of time, and I just think I was tired of that, and was ready for change. And so I received the diagnosis and literally went into shock. And within a couple of weeks, I had had a full mastectomy with delayed reconstruction, which basically meant that I was 13 months without a breast. And that for me was very traumatic. Being honest, my breasts were my favourite part of my body, and it really did impact on my self-esteem. And
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I can imagine that, anyone in that situation would be sort of shocked. I mean, people experience things that are maybe not so as traumatic or sort of life altering, and yet, they experience sort of this shock in their life with things that are, much more minor to an extent. So thank you so much for sharing that. Can you also maybe share with us what were some of the initial challenges that you faced, like immediately after? So I know you mentioned sort of the self-esteem, but were there other things that were happening in your life that were, that you were sort of confronted with some of these challenges as you were facing this, new situation in your life?
yeah, I was, like I said, working for a big organisation. There was huge amounts of change going on. I was really actually very stressed and not living the most healthy lifestyle. I think that I was, maybe overindulging in different ways. And yeah, I just feel like my stress levels were really high. And there was a lot going on in other areas of my life. Unless you want me to go into them, I won't. But I'm happily married, so that was all very supportive. But my actual other factors in my life were quite stressful. And so that was the lead up. There was a lot of stress going on. And like I say, this kind of premise of thinking, I felt that there was something there that I couldn't quite get to. And then, of course, the diagnosis came. So I don't know if that answers your question, but one thing I would add is when I received the diagnosis, having no breast cancer in my family that I'm aware of, even somewhat extended, and being a rare, unusual type of breast cancer, I was just kind of floored. And so that was the initial, just like coming to terms with it, like just being hit. It was literally a whole embodied trauma. It just felt so traumatizing. And I remember that I'd kind of wake up and just the first thing that would come to my mind is I have cancer. And that was really, took me a while to kind of digest it, shall we say.
Right, right. So what were some of the things that maybe you did to help you start working through that denial, that um, lack of acceptance of what was maybe showing up in your life? Like, what were some of the things that helped you to start accepting and to start looking at the challenge you were being faced with in a new way or in a different way?
Yeah. I think some of the things that really helped me, and I think with most people, when you have that initial big shock and surgeries, and then within 16 months I'd had 5 surgeries, one was a major surgery, that you know, it's that kind of stop starting. So I then was, you know, finding ways to keep myself calm. I had been meditating in the past, and meditation became a big thing for me that was really important. So I couldn't do, initially I was unable to do the longer meditations because it just felt too confronting. So I'd say like mindfulness of body and breath, 3-step or 3-minute breathing spaces. So that became part of my practice. And also nature was huge for me. I lived in London, but I actually lived next to part of the remainder of the ancient woodland of London. And it makes me actually feel even emotional saying it now because it was an absolute lifesaver for me. When I wasn't recovering from surgeries, I'd go on long walks and just spend time walking because I really found that movement really helped. Being in nature. It was kind of summer. It was a pretty good summer as I remember it. And so that just connecting and just sitting and just looking at the microcosm of nature and the macrocosm, gardening, my support network. You know, there were certain people who were really there for me. So, you know, that was really where I started in the process. And I was able to more kind of become more embodied in it, if you know what I mean. And then I can say more, if you like, about the, you know, other steps around that. You know, as time, you know, the weeks went on, then I was opened up to more different things that I was able to access and make use of. So initially, those were things such as different healing modalities to release trauma in the body. I actually went back into therapy, which I don't think is that uncommon after a little while, just to help me to kind of, you know, have a space for that and not feel like I was overburdening other people, or just having somebody there in that professional capacity was massive for me. And then I don't know whether to say this at this point, but and as time went on, it was just different things at different times. Yeah.
Right. So I love how you mentioned, you know, exploring different alternative healing modalities. How you mentioned something that possibly helped with dealing with trauma in the body. What can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I did a lot of kind of like hands-on healing, like Reiki, that type of, you know.
Yes.
I went to sacred sites. It's been a big thing for me, visiting and grounding in sacred sites. So just to stay a little bit with the healing modalities, some of that was like EMDR. I also had, like I say, different forms. I had like angelic healing or Reiki healing. And I think I just got, well, I don't think, I know, I was just led at different points, not all at once, you know?
Right.
And, you know, retreats. I'm trying to think of any, craniosacral was really, really useful as well.
Oh, can you tell me a little bit more about that? I'm not
It's a
sure that I
very,
know too much about.
yeah, it's a very subtle movement where they work with the tides of your body, where she held my head, and I don't even understand fully how it works, but it's subtle movement in the person's hand and attention and energy. And you could feel trauma leaving the body at different points, unspiraling, sometimes have images that would arise that were relevant to, you know, at the time. That also happened for me with things like Reiki and other types of healing. I think a big part also was becoming educated around, you know, supplements and, you know, alternative therapies. I worked with alternative people that use diet and supplementation and things like that.
Yeah.
colonics, all the nice things.
That's, no, I thank you for sharing. That's really been something that I say that we have in common with our journey is that, it was so important for me to find that healing and find, a place where my health was sort of back in balance or in alignment. And so, like you, I experimented and tried all kinds of different healing modalities and really had to learn how to eat properly and put the right
Mm,
nutrients in my body. And we think that we're eating properly when we have our typical meals, as long as you're not eating fast food every day and you're cooking at home, you think that you're eating well. But in fact, when we actually look at some of the things that we do eat, a lot of that stuff is actually not good for our body. And
mm,
so it really does taking learning so much about your mindset, your emotions, your physical well-being in order to bring true healing into balance. Yeah, and
yeah.
that's something that I teach, my students is that if we're looking for true health or true wellness or overcoming our mental or emotional sort of blocks, then we need to bring all of those areas into perfect harmony, really, into perfect balance.
I completely agree. I think that it's the holistic aspect, isn't it? It's mind, body, soul. And for me, it was very much about, getting grounded, getting in contact with nature, getting that place first and then moving forward from that. Having the different healing modalities. I'm sure some more will spring to mind. I did have a lot, but not all at once. And, also the spiritual aspect, going on the inner journey. And I think trauma release, however that is expressed for the individual, is absolutely key. I know not all life shocks are obviously ill health, but I do know
Right.
that, you know, I would say all, if not most, life shocks involve, an assault on the nervous system. And so it's so important for us to take care of ourselves holistically within that, the spiritual, emotional. Yeah.
Agree, agree. And once as soon as there's an assault on the nervous system, it immediately imprints trauma in the body. And that trauma will eventually lead to having physical ailments or physical conditions like chronic diseases or, as you experience, life altering situations that can happen in the body. And,
Mm.
that is as a result of a lot of the trauma that we hold on to, or a lot of the emotions that we hold on to, because our body, unfortunately, we've sort of come away from practices and things that would help us to deal with that trauma or help us to process that trauma. But in today's society, we're not necessarily exposed to some of these tools or some of these practices that allow us to process the trauma. And so we hold on to it. And when we hold on to it, it stays trapped in
Mm.
our body and on our organs, and that, eventually it wreaks havoc on our health. So it's so important to process the trauma and to process our emotions.
Absolutely. And I think what's key, in my opinion, within that, is that it's doing what's right for us at any given point.
Yeah.
So, at some points, one particular therapy or one particular modality was right for me. And then it's like listening to the inner guidance and releasing that and doing something else. And also, from my work with soul purpose coaching, I feel that also when we're stuck in a lifestyle or a life or a career that no longer serves us, that can really reinforce that stuck energy and being, affect our nervous system and, our happiness. Actually, if I may, I want to say something about happiness and joy in all of this. Is very early on, that was something that I realized was so healing, is to have fun, laughter, you know, because it's not all about the serious, spiritual, that's all good too. But it's that balance. I'm a believer in balance in all things, and we need to laugh. We need to do enjoyable things. 3 weeks after my surgery, we went on holiday. It was planned. I think it was less than 3 weeks actually. I was still healing, and I'm like, no, I'm going. We took it easy, but it was the best thing I did, was to not be fearful and go.
Yeah.
So yeah, I
And,
think well,
and not to stay in that sort of energy of being or of sort of, having just come out of surgery, you tend to, as you said, you tend to take it more easy. You go light on yourself, and that's great. That certainly wasn't, it's not like you're necessarily looking to not be easy on yourself or go easy, but
mm,
it's a different energy when you just sitting at home
mm,
and trying to recover versus maybe going out and doing those fun things. And like you said, when we inject and bring laughter and joy into our life, we can actually heal faster than if you were just sitting at home, for weeks and weeks on end, recovering from, the surgery and all the trauma that you were dealing with.
absolutely. It's something that it makes you realize. For me, one thing that happened in my life shock, and I don't know if others will relate to this. It doesn't matter whether, because life shocks come in all forms of, it could be a life ill health, it could be a bereavement, a relationship breakdown, a loss of job or income, all of those things. And it's just so important for us to take care of ourselves within all of that. Come up for me, it's like the importance of having a higher energy and frequency, because of course that attracts to us health and well-being.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Now, you mentioned earlier that you sort of knew that what you were going through, what you were experiencing, was leading you towards maybe that life transformation or a life shift, right? You said earlier on that you had a feeling that this was going to bring about something uh, transformational in your life.
Mm.
What were some of the things that gave you those signs? Like what helped you to know that that was what might be coming?
Do you mean after I was diagnosed? I think the transformation that came from my life shock was that initial sense of, it's an old cliche for a reason. This isn't a dress rehearsal. And when I was waiting for different test results to come back, and I didn't know which way it was going to go, there was that sense of, is this it for me? And is my life going to be cut short? And that really was a wake up call. And I think what emerged from that was very powerful, because it made me review my life. And there were certain things that I was very happy with. I'm very happy in my marriage, my relationship, certain friendships. I knew my career needed to change. Although I loved being a therapist and I'd done that for 10 years, that expression of life purpose had come to an end, and it was challenging to let go, but I let go of that. And so it made me reevaluate, just stop and think, what's working, what's not working, and release and let go of some of the things that weren't working. And I knew, even though saying goodbye to my job and my career was like, oh, gasp. I knew it was the right thing to do, and it was. And it led me on to, what I'm doing now, which is now I'm a big believer in, we all have an essence in our life purpose, that who we are at core and soul level, but it's expressed in different ways at different times in our lives. And so although there are overlaps between coaching and being a therapist or counselor, it's also a different energy for me personally. And so this is an expression that I've now moved into that feels more in alignment. And I love working with, women in this way. Lifestyle, I changed a lot around my lifestyle, as I've already mentioned. And just to say that, I'm not sitting here saying that, of course I'm not perfect in that. We are not linear beings living a linear experience. We are cyclical. we're not perfect. And so within all of this, it's important that we, when we fall back into old habits, or we feel that we've messed up or not done as well as we might have, that we bring lots of kindness and compassion towards ourselves. I think that's one thing I've really learned, because one of the messages I used to receive from a lot of people is, don't be so hard on yourself, Liz. And it's that sense of, and that's really where my mindfulness comes in, is that sense of the mindful attitudes. I don't know if you've heard of those kind of mindful attitudes. I've, later on, as you know, I've got my, meditation and workbook that I'm, making available. And within that I have my kind of interpretation of the mindful attitudes, and they really, really help me, because that's all about kindness and self-compassion towards ourselves, which is absolutely key, because none of us are perfect, and we do slip back into habits sometimes, or we're not always doing as well as we think we should be. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely. We're so hard on ourselves. We're so hard on ourselves. And I agree. We have to practice much more compassion with ourselves. And I think once we start there, then it becomes so much easier to offer compassion to others.
Oh, God.
But we are our own worst critics. And when we're constantly criticizing ourselves, it makes it so much easier for us to see the faults and cast judgment on others, right? But as you mentioned, when we start to practice compassion with ourselves, then that we can extend that to others. And I think that could be, a starting point for creating massive change in our world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's part of it, that kind of life shock, reevaluation, the inner journey, the releasing of trauma, all those things, and kind of, and within all of that, a bit later on with the, coaching to get really clear on what we need as well. I mean, that's been transformative for me. I think that's been one of the biggest wake-up calls, and not wake-up calls, it's been one of the biggest things, is like making me stop, have the inner journey, really listening. And now when I feel like I'm doing too much, I just think nothing's worth my health. And I will literally stop myself and say, okay, does this really need to be done today or in this moment? And I'll actually give myself a talking to, so to speak. Much better than I used to, absolutely.
That's wonderful. Yeah. I mean, we all need to do that. We all need to, pause and reflect inwards and go on that sort of journey where we can be honest with ourselves and ask ourselves these really like hard questions, like you mentioned, and just say, is this really necessary? Is it worth what I'm compromising, whether it's our health, our financial well-being, our mental well-being, our family, our friendships? Is it really worth compromising some of those things in our life, right?
Absolutely. And one thing, if I may put it in here, is it's not just the things that we do, it's also the things we don't do, or we put boundaries around. So something I feel like it's important for me to share is, other than kind of going out there and seeking help from others and going inwards to receive my own guidance, which I think, we are sovereign beings, that's ultimately what we need to be following.
Yes.
We need help and assistance from others, absolutely. And particularly, that whole word selfish needs to be reframed. When you have a life shock, and, if you're ill or you've had your immune system compromised in some way, you need to come back to yourself and really nourish and nurture yourself. And I believe that once we do that we can then help those from the overflow of the cup, if you like.
Yeah.
So what I also want to add here is that there was, a relationship, or sometimes there's relationships where we need to be more boundaried. So when we've had a life shock or something's happened in our lives, and we know that something is depleting our energy, it's toxic, or however you put it. And I'm not saying this in a blaming way to individuals at all, because everyone's going through what they're going through. But sometimes we need to put boundaries in place and we need to distance ourselves from certain people or certain energies, because I'm a firm believer that we, I like that quote, your word is your wand, that everything and I extend that to everything we say outwardly, everything we say internally, so in our mind, everything we allow in through our senses will have an effect on us, and it becomes the quality of your life, right? So, what we eat, what we listen to, what we say to ourselves, do you find some people, talk to themselves in a way they'd never talk to their friends? So it's all
Yes.
of those things, is what do we allow in, right? And that can be, and that's also relationships. If somebody, when you're recovering in some way, particularly, is pushing, boundaries, and that needs to be redressed, then this is the time in life. It's always the time, but you can't afford not to do it at these times. Recently, just a simple example, I was at the cinema, the first time probably ever I walked out of a film, because I hadn't gone to a horror or anything terrible, but it just didn't sit right with me. I was feeling really uncomfortable. I was feeling, my anxiety was going up, and I'm like, I actually don't need this.
Yes.
So it's those little decisions that we become more attuned to.
Yes. I love that. I love that. And it's important for us to really get to that point where we can set those boundaries. We really need to go in on that inward journey and understand what our priorities, what are our values, what are our beliefs, so that when we are faced with these situations, we can set those boundaries, right? Because had you not taken the time to really discover what is important to you, then we would continue to just truck along and allow all of this stimulation from the outside world sort of into our realm, and ultimately it affects us, and we don't always realize that. But what we listen to, as you said, what we watch, what we eat, what we consume in any way, whether it's physical or it's our attention, it has an impact on our lives and on ourselves ultimately. And so it is really important to, as you mentioned, to go on that journey so that you can set those boundaries, so that when, if you're in an environment or in a situation that is bringing up the anxiety or is making you feel uncomfortable, if you didn't know that about yourself, then you would just stay in that situation and continue to allow that situation to transpire, which would inevitably lead to sort of triggering that trauma or triggering those emotions or those mental thoughts or those mindsets, sort of that negative self-talk that we all have. It would reactivate and it would trigger that over and over again. Whereas, by making that decision or being clear on who you are, you can set that boundary and say, you know what, when I'm in this situation, I feel like this, or I start to think this, or I start to believe this. And so it's important for me to recognize that and help and remove myself from those situations, so that you're creating those healthy boundaries, or you're not triggering or activating things that are going to lead you to believe or reinforce an ideology or a belief system about yourself that is not even true. Because so many of us have belief systems about who we are and what we are that have been sort of ingrained in us from when we were younger, but are the furthest from the truth of who we actually are.
Mm, mm, yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's we really it, we really need to be mindful of the situations we put ourselves in. And I hear a lot of people, I hear clients saying things like, but that's quite challenging to do. And and one of the things I would say, it's like a muscle. It's like, it's like going to the gym. The first time you went to the gym, I don't go to the gym, don't like it. I like yoga, but just as an analogy. Or first time you did an asana, and you can't get into downward dog, you don't do it the first time. But it's not giving up. It's kind of going back to it and back to it with ease and grace. And those muscles will develop. And it's the same with boundaries. It might be difficult to say no initially to certain people. And one little hack I like is if you're always saying yes to everything or yes to a certain person, it's just taking that pause and taking a deep breath and say, something simple like, I'll get back to you on that. I need to go to my diary or whatever it is, rather than that knee jerk, finding yourself in that situation repeatedly. Yeah, kind of reminds me of, I don't know if you know the poem by Portia Nelson called, I think it's like Life in 5 Chapters. Do you know that one?
No,
It's a really good one. It's
I'm
about
not.
that. Yeah, it's about, walking down the street and then eventually walking around the pothole. And then in time, we go down another street. We don't even go down the same street.
Right, exactly. Start to learn from our lessons, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
And on that note, what would you say were some of the biggest lessons that you've learned from this experience, both about yourself and about sort of life in general?
That is a big question. It's a great question. There's so much I could say.
Yes.
um, I think that being so generous and kind towards ourselves, and through that kind of practice, whatever your practice is developing that observer self, so that we can see all that chitter chatter and not always be enmeshed in it,
Right.
but rather we can respond rather than react more frequently, and be kind to ourselves when we fall into the old traps. So I might just mix this all into one actually, but it's kind of that sense that we're stronger than we ever believe we are. We're more powerful, that we are sovereign beings, and that what is, in my opinion, the most important thing is, yes, listen to advice and go outward and get all the helping, all the help, the coaching, the therapy, whatever you need. But ultimately, it comes back to you developing that relationship with yourself so that you can trust yourself, and knowing. I know this is quite a long answer, but also knowing that, okay, sometimes we receive a download from the universe and we make big leaps and bounds and jumps, and that's wonderful. But more often than not, it's the little steps, the little decisions we take every day, that lead us in that right direction. Yeah, I've said some of the other stuff I think along the way, but
Oh, I love that. Thank you for sharing. You did mention that it's about going on that inward journey, and you might have answered some of this or shared some of this along the way, but what are some things or some practices or tools that someone can use to go on that inward journey so that they can begin to trust themselves? Because that is one of the things that people struggle most with, is maintaining or having a practice or something that allows them to go inwards, but that builds the trust.
yeah, it cut out a little bit there. I didn't hear the last bit. Sorry.
Oh, sorry,
That
and that
build.
helps to build that trust.
Yeah. I think it's so in terms of practices, I really do believe there's not a one size fits all. And so it's finding something that you enjoy, that fits with your values, that just sits right with you. And if it's something like meditation, not thinking that we have to sit in, I don't know, the lotus pose for hours on end. You may get to that point, you may not, but it's just doing bite-sized pieces, particularly when you're coming out of a life shock, because often it can be challenging to go too deeply and too quickly. So it's like and playing with that edge. So if you're doing a meditation, starting with the shorter meditations and building up, and knowing that if anything arises that's challenging, that we can move away with it. We can work with the edge of that. You know what I mean? And always using our breath. We have everything in our body that we need. We have our breath, we have our feet to put on the ground, to ground. You have your breath, you have your body. I use one of the things I didn't mention, I can't believe it because I'm a sound I'm a sound healer as well, is sound. I use sound every day. I use tuning forks. So it's a ritual, you know, having an altar. I have an altar that I dress regularly, the cycles of the moon, sometimes not. That sounds like a lot, but you don't have to do them all at once. So it's kind of having that space, that physical space and that inner space. Trying to think if there's anything else. So yeah, I think my main message there is finding like a practice. It could be a meditation, it could be yoga, it could be walking in nature. I mean, that was massive for me. That is a spiritual practice, actually. You know, I connect with the divine through nature. That's a big part. Getting your hands in soil, you know. So I really do think that it's finding what works for you and not getting caught in that mindset of, oh, well, everybody else is doing this, I must stick with it. If it's not resonating, then put it aside and try something else. Does that kind of answer what,
Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely. I love that. And that's an important message for people to walk away with, because I think, as you mentioned, we get caught up in you know, doing the practice because we've been told that it works for others, or that we've been told is great. Yet, you know, if it's not working for us, we're, you know, continuing to sort of, you know, plug ahead and move forward with resistance. And the minute we have resistance towards something, then it doesn't work. It needs to come with a free flow energy. It needs to be able to move through us and feel easy and feel like, you know, it's something that we enjoy doing. And so if, you know, we're practicing something that feels like we're resisting it, then it's important to just move on to something else, find something else that resonates more with who we.
Yeah. I mean, if that continued, if everything we try is kind of like that, then we might want to regroup and think, hang on, what's happening here?
Yeah,
But,
exactly.
you know, it might just be, you know, an avoidance because, you know, there might be an unconscious kind of sense of, oh, I'm concerned of what will arise, or, you know, so it's just kind of keeping those things in check, you know, and also, as I think I said this earlier, but it's like what works now and this month, you might do it for a while, that might be released in something new. You practice something new, something different.
Yes, yes. But the important part is having that time and space for yourself to go inwards, to just pause, to, you know, take a few moments from the chaos of life and just, you know, get connected to your breath, get connected to, you know, nature, as you said. And that was one of the things for me that, and still continues to be one of the practices or tools that I leverage, is just going on a long walk in nature and, you know, just taking in that fresh air and just, you know, really connecting to the sounds and everything that's in my surroundings, rather than sort of tuning out and being, you know, forced into this sort of 3D dense energy that, you know, we all experience on this earth, right? It's
Yeah.
very dense energy, and we have to find ways to connect with, you know, higher frequencies, and nature is a great resource.
Yeah, I love that. And I think what you touched upon something really important, which I think is, yes, we can have our daily practices or rituals or altars or, you know, oracle cards, whatever is our thing, but it's knowing that throughout the day, just taking, you know, just putting your hand on your heart and taking a few deeper breaths while your feet are firmly on the ground as many times through the day, or when you walk out in nature, just looking up at the sky and taking a few deep breaths and just taking it all in, you know, making our lives a practice rather than this segmentation, you know.
Yes,
I
exactly.
think that's so important, and I do find that beautiful, and the grand design really of who we are, which is part of the oneness. And I think that's so important to, you know, acknowledge that behind all of the noise of our, some of our fixed mindsets and all the rest of it, behind all of that is the stillness, and that is who we truly are. And we're part of that oneness, part of that oneness and part of the whole. And we are divine beings. And as you've said about, stepping out of the program, we need to step out of that, the program that we all find ourselves in. All the advertising, all the noise around us that makes us not feel good enough. How much of that are we letting in? Turn it off. I haven't watched the news for 2 years.
Yes, me neither.
So, it's not to say I'm ignorant and don't stay up to date,
Of course.
but don't keep traumatizing ourselves with all this kind of outward noise. How's that
Yeah.
helping?
Yeah. And, I feel like part of this experience is I like to refer it as like a sort of like a video game. Like we're inside a simulation and we have all of these things coming at us all the time, but it's really on us to pick and choose where we invest our energy or pick and choose where, we put our attention, because that's ultimately what's going to help us or lead us to conquering the challenge or being able to sort of move up to the next level. And for me, I have found that, when I stay tuned into the sort of the energy and the frequency of the video game, stay focused on all the things that are being thrown at me all the time, it becomes very challenging to find the problem or find the solution, solve the solution for that level that I'm sort of playing at in my video game before I can up level. And the more I sort of go on that inward journey and tune in and connect to nature and connect to ultimately the divine, myself, my higher self and divine, and connect to others, that's where I find the answers to the problems that allow me to move on to the next level in the game. And over the last few years, as I've started sort of disconnecting more and more from this 3D world, the easier I'm finding it to tune in to the divine, tune into those messages, tune into the guidance that is helping me along in this game, in this journey we call life, right?
Absolutely. I love that analogy of the video game. And when we think that energy flows where our attention goes, where we place it, that is where it's directed. You place your hand on your heart, your energy, it releases endorphins, all of that. If we put the energy on, I know, watching the news 5 hours a day, that's what, we're ending up living in fight flight mode. And that's when we can't think. It's like an attack on thinking. We can't be with the divine part of who we are. And I love that. I'm trying to think who said it. I don't know if it was Lao Tzu. It's like the quieter you become, the more you hear.
Yes, I have found that myself as well. But you're hearing the messages that are coming from within rather than all of the sort of messages being fed at us from the external world, whether it's from, society at large or from even the people that are closest to us in our life and who love us. They want the best for us, but sometimes that doesn't always necessarily mean that it's what is right for us and who we are and what's in alignment with the person that we are meant to be in this physical existence or in this sort of life.
Absolutely. And as you were saying that, just remind me, I mean, a big part of my message is meant for more, that
Yeah.
about owning our power and our sovereignty. And I think that's a big thing I got from this awakening, because ultimately that's what happened is I had a spiritual awakening. It's taken me a while to say that, but I had a spiritual awakening from that was part of the transformation. And we need that, to kind of more connect more fully, like you say, to our higher self.
Yes. So many of us go through spiritual awakening and don't feel comfortable, I would say, or um, yeah, we have these ideas of what a spiritual awakening is, and so many of us feel like what we've gone through isn't a spiritual awakening because it doesn't look um, like your typical spiritual awakening, like everything was done with like grace and ease, and you're this perfect being that is always 100% vibrating at a high frequency, or always 100% feeling grounded. Like, the reality is that that's what a spiritual awakening is all about, is going through the ups and downs and the roller coasters of that journey. And it doesn't have to look perfect all the time, or it doesn't have to look like, you've gone off and you've become, a monk or a Buddhist, and you're meditating all day, every day for your whole entire life. That's not necessarily what a spiritual awakening looks like. And so many people feel like because their journey doesn't resemble that, that it's not necessarily an awakening. And
Oh
I would
God.
encourage you to say that, as long as you're being called to go on an inward journey, that is what the spiritual awakening is about.
It's messy. I mean, I don't really trust the whole idea that it's like this kind of Zen floating on a
Yes.
cloud 100% of the time. I personally don't think that that's the case. It's sometimes hard work. A lot of stuff comes to the surface. That we're here in this school called life, aren't we? To learn and become more aware and awake and shed all the stuff from, I know, if you believe this, the past lives and even this life and traumas and all of that. And it's not a sitting on a cloud in the lotus position for the best part. I'm not saying that that's not part of it. And then I think we get into the shadow side of spirituality. If we, for those who, that promote, I'm not saying those who promote it, but if that's what we start saying it is, then I think that's the bit of the shadow side, I think, of the whole spiritual, I don't know what you want to call it, out there, is that it isn't always love and light, although love and light is beautiful and part of it.
Yes, absolutely. But there is, just like everything in our world, there's a duality, right? Where there's
Absolutely.
love and light, there's also the shadow, and those two come in hand in hand. And I think for people to really appreciate or understand what that looks like, what the journey looks like, is we have to get through the shadow and that sort of darker sides of us and those darker parts of us, for us to be able to see the light and for us to be able to come out on the other side. We first have to embrace and
Yeah.
go through the shadow. It's the only way that we can appreciate what the light is because we've
Yes.
gone through those darker sides, or we've gone through that darker period, and we've had to confront and face those darker sides of us, or those shadow parts of us.
I totally agree. And for me, I think this is my personal view. It's like that, I think you say a closet, we'd say wardrobe in the UK.
Yes.
It's like when you're a little kid or whatever, it's like, oh, what's in the back of there? Or, at night you feel a bit scared. And if we just keep it closed, it becomes bigger than it actually is. And more often than not, when we open the closet and we start to take the things out in our own time, gently, with ease and grace, then it's often, more often than not, as scary as we thought it would be. And
Yes.
it's not to say that there won't be things that knock you off your feet sometimes, yeah. And that's why we need to pace ourselves and have support in place. So I think this is the part where I want to say support in place at different key points is so key. Whatever that is, whether it is a health practitioner, a therapist, a coach, or something like that to help. And what I didn't say earlier that I kind of lost my thread was the meant for more message for me is also about us choosing, because we're all meant for more, and it's about a decision. And for some of us, or some points, we might decide, actually, no, I just want to coast at the moment, or it is a decision. We are, and we all have different things from our past, whether we're from a marginalized group, whether we've had different traumas, childhood traumas, or whatever it is, we may feel that we're a late bloomer, which is what I've often felt myself. But, we get to a point where we begin to unpack it all in that supportive space so that we can emerge more fully that beautiful soul that we are. That's what I think.
Yes, I couldn't agree more. Having support is so key. It's so important. Um, it, not to say that it makes the journey um, less sort of painful in any way, and not to say that it is always painful, but when you have that guidance and support, it brings a little bit more ease into the experience. It also gives you a different perspective, because far too often we're really sort of stuck in our own point of view, or our own mindset. And I personally found that it was through speaking with different practitioners or different experts in the field that really helped to shape and open up my own perspective to look at my life in a different way. And so, I certainly couldn't have done it alone without the help and the support of, key people in my life that helped me sort of move forward and take that next leap in my life.
Oh yeah, I could. We are. It's so important that whether it's family, friends, professionals, it's asking for help is a big part, isn't it? And some people that's not easy. It's not
No.
easy to ask for help. In different ways, I've found that easier as time's gone on. But I just would say that if you're asking the right people, and you'll know who they are because they're the people who show up for you. Often people love to help, and they will, more often than not will. And we can't do it alone. Absolutely can't do it alone. Yeah, I certainly couldn't have got to where I am in my life without people around me. We are pack animals, really, aren't we?
We thrive in communities. That's what makes humans and this human experience so beautiful. Like we do come alive, and I think we can excel so much more when we are in a supportive community than when the world is the way it is these days, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, because something just arose was for me. I meant to say earlier is that whole thing that of a life shock is that we can have our own individual life shocks, but there are collective life shocks, and 2020, say no more, was a collective, the biggest collective life shock I think of most, if not all, of our lifetimes.
Yeah.
And within that collective life shock, we of course then have the double, the
Yes,
duality of our own individual response to that. So just want to express that, and it can trigger old wounds as well. And I think for me, there's certainly in 2020 that that it kind of brought up stuff for me that came back in a different way, if that makes sense. Because sometimes we deal with things, don't we? You think, okay, that's done, done and dusted. And I'm a real believer that, now I said about the linear, is like, if you think about the Fibonacci spiral that this whole planet and nature is formed out of, I think that our experiences are like that too, in that we might visit something on that spiral in one way, and then we come back another way, I don't know, a year, 2 years, 3 years later. And I really believe that happened for a lot of people with what's happened in the world, that obviously the repercussions are still going on for many people, all of us, in different ways. Does that make sense, that what I'm saying? I think.
Yes, absolutely. And I think we were talking about this earlier before, we started our call, that I also think that every time we are sort of leveling up in our experience, in this human experience, that we are we are sort of faced with having to revisit some of those previous challenges that we've worked on. And I think that's part of the lesson in just sort of confirming or affirming that we've healed we've healed past that experience and that we are truly ready to take the next level. And I think that some of those old belief systems or patterns or traumas, do come to the surface at different points, even though we've done a lot of healing or done a lot of work around some of those issues, that they come to the surface again to almost, I take it like it's almost for us to revisit and confirm that, yes, we are over this, we are past the situation, so that we can take our life to the next level. And I feel like, 2020 was an opportunity for many, but I think that we go through this at different points in our life over and over again. And I think it's just, sort of the divine, the creator, God, just checking in with us to say, you're ready. Are you ready to level up? Are you ready to take the next step? If you're ready, then let's look at this first and make sure that this isn't, children again. Or so
Absolutely, and it's like that. I love that what you're saying there, because it's like that leveling up, and when we revisit it, it's on a. It depends how you see it. It's like a deepening of it. Yes, we learned that lesson. Yes, we work through that, but it tends to be more stuff there, right? And
yes,
and how I see it also is some of this stuff is challenging to work through, of course, but the rewards are so great when we're lightened and we see clearer. I know my relationships are deeper and deepening, and I often feel that if we don't face these things, that we're left with the unlived life, and that is not a place where it's actually making me feel quite moved by that sense of the unlived life. We might think we're protecting ourselves by staying small and not going there, but actually we don't just stay stagnant, do we? If we don't look at stuff, it actually compounds. And I'm not trying to say this to scare anyone at all, because I've been there myself, but rather that if we know that we can broach it at little bits at a time, we don't have to plunge straight in, and sometimes that can be re-traumatizing, but if we could just go near and nibble away at the edges even, because the gifts are great. It is challenging to do at times, but the rewards are immense. And to get to the end of life, I think that's what it brought up for me with my life shock, that waiting for results was, gosh, if this is it, am I really happy with how it had panned out, and making decisions from then.
right.
Yeah.
And it's really what you want your life to be about. If this is it, if this is, the end is, have you been living your life in a way that brings you joy and satisfaction and makes you feel fulfilled, and that you can say, if this is your time, or if this is that moment that
Mm.
you can reflect back and say, I lived a good life, or I made an impact, or I changed people's lives. If that's the case, great. But if that's not how you can look back on your life, then maybe that's the sign that life needs to change
I
for you.
know. Oh, can I share something? It's not to do with this life shock I've just had, but it just feels really poignant for me right now. And that is when sometimes we make that leap and it feels scary, but we know that it's the right thing to do. 20 years ago, when I met my husband, before that, I'd gone through a huge phase of thinking, I'm going to be on my own. I'm never going to meet anybody. And, I just didn't, this is quite a few years ago now, right? So things have changed, but I felt quite unlovable and all of that. And all of that. and and by making a leap, I actually left a religion that I belonged to. I won't go into that now, it was time. But and by doing that, I felt, gosh, isolated and whatever. And a couple of months later, I actually met my husband, and we've been together, and all the things that we're really happy together. And of course, we've had our challenges. I'm not painting the perfect picture, but we are really happy together. And I think that was another point in my life is where you take a calculated risk, is that the universe will pay that back, you know. I hope that feels
Well,
better, but it did to me, because I just felt like there were so many years that I just thought, oh gosh, I'm never going to meet anybody. I'm not going to, and that can change when we take that leap.
yes. And I think, what we don't realize and what we're not taught is that everything we want in life and out of life, and even more, because I think sometimes we can't conceptualize or visualize how grand and abundant and beautiful this life can be, because we always see so much devastation and
Mhm.
war and poverty, and we see so much negativity on the news on a regular basis that we don't have full appreciation for how grand and beautiful this life can actually
Oh
be.
gosh, yeah.
But I think that when you do embrace the journey and when you do go on the journey, that it starts to open up your life in like beautiful ways that you could not have conceptualized or could not have conceived. But
Mm.
it takes sort of going on that journey and being brave enough to face those challenges along the journey, because the reality is that there are going to be challenges that we're going to face, but those challenges are meant to help us grow and evolve and keep going forward. And if we're committed to that process and committed to the journey, then as we sort of mentioned already, like what comes out of it on the other side of it is so beautiful that we can't even really conceptualize what it can be. We think we have ideas, we think we have, these hopes and dreams of what it can be, but we don't truly know what it is until you've embarked on the journey and made the commitment to continue on the journey despite the challenges and despite the things that come up along the way.
Absolutely. There's that, when you think about it, we there are so many beautiful times we have in life, but how much do we really learn from those? We do. We can have lessons, and I really, that beautiful day out and a beautiful night, and it really noticed this or that or the other. But by and large, the greatest lessons and kind of being more catapulted forward come from the challenges, and that is the reward. That's how the universe works, right?
Yeah.
Something just to add there, which I think is absolutely key in my opinion, and that is when you're going through the challenges, to bring in the light-hearted. There've been times where I've been really difficult things happening, and you have to laugh. Bring in the self-care, the self-love in its obvious forms, but even like making some time and space just to watch a comedy, or and I don't mean to make light of what the individual's going through. Of course we're still going through it, but we don't have to sit in that the whole time. We need some brevity. I think that's the word. Just yeah, so that's how I feel about that, and that's why I think laughter is huge medicine. I mean, really, fun, adventure is and laughter all the way.
Oh, I love that. Um, what was the best advice you received while you were going through this process?
There's a few things that spring to mind, and I mentioned a couple of them. One is what I said earlier: don't be so hard on yourself. Be loving and generous. Treat yourself like you would a new little puppy or a child, particularly when you're going through a traumatic time or a challenging time. That's one. And then I'm a big lover of a lot of what I classify as mindful poetry. And I've got a lot of insights from that. One of my favorites is Always We Hope by Lao Tzu, which is on about the inner journey, not going out, but going in. And Go In and In by Dana Folds, who's a yoga teacher. But So it's interesting where advice comes from. It can sometimes come from you get a repeated comment that people are observing about you in a loving way, such as be kinder to yourself, Liz, or whoever you are. And also through the arts and through nature. And I think nature, just looking out my window now, and it's not quite come out yet, but there's a magnolia tree out over there, a massive one. And it's that sense that even in the winter, we look out that we're coming out of winter, we've had in bulk, we're going more towards spring. And it looks as if not a lot's going on out there, the leaves most of them haven't come back yet, and there's buds on the, little buds, but there's a lot going on underground, and it's getting all the energy in to burst forth. And I think one of my greatest lessons and teachers has been that whole cyclical nature piece, where we can't always be in that up, creative, abundant place of the bloom of the rose or the bloom of the magnolia. But that's not to say that all the other seasons, they have their merit too, and we will come back to that blooming magnolia tree again. Yeah,
That's so important. I love that. Yeah, thank you. That's something that I've been learning myself through this journey, is that everything is cyclical, and to expect that, we're always going to be happy, or we're always going to be sad, or we're always going to be in whatever state we're going to be in is not realistic. And we have to understand that, as life sort of ebbs and flows, we do too with our emotions and our sort of well-being, not our well-being, but our sort of mental state of being, is that we go through those ebbs and flows ourselves. And we have to allow sort of space for when we are in that ebb, and we need to sort of go inward, to reflect, to grow, to learn, so that when it's time to be in the flow again, that we are coming at it from a different perspective, or we're coming at it from, with a new lesson learned, or, being at a sort of higher level of consciousness, or whatever the case may be. But we do need to go through the sort of the cyclical part of this human experience, because it's not just found in nature, it's found in ourselves as well.
Oh, yeah, yeah, and we are nature. That's when I say nature, I'm saying
Yes,
out.
every
I'm thinking actually of the kind of hermetic principles, which is how I see the governance of this universe, right? So, you mentioned the polarities, and which is one of them, right? And then as above, so below, as within, so without, all those principles, and, the whole cause and effect, all of that. And I think, and this is a big mindfulness part, is if we always expect things to be different, which is our tendency as humans, we will always be dissatisfied. And it's about that sense of acceptance, that being in the moment, being open to the moment, being present, not for a future reward or a past anxiety, but if we can just live in this present moment, which is all we actually have, and not wishing it to be different, which isn't always easy, right?
right.
But that is where life is experienced.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, I love that. What would be sort of your advice for someone who might be going through, a bit of a life shock, or a major sort of transformation in their life? What little piece of advice that you might have that can help them navigate the process and sort of come out on the other side?
Yeah. Okay. I think there are stages that I've kind of said along the way. Just some little bits is always coming back to yourself. Getting grounded is the first thing I would say to anyone, however you see that. Just coming back to yourself, using the body, using the breath, using nature, using the tools, also your community. And, we're not an island, that, it's a cliche for a reason. We need help from other people. And that you are a sovereign being. And after whatever you're going through is coming back to yourself. For me, it's always that. You can, help people can help you to get there through questioning and all the rest of it. But you are a sovereign being. You're a beautiful soul. each of us are, and just, yeah, just coming back to that and being as generous and kind and compassionate towards ourselves as we possibly can in those, I'm talking to those early days.
Right,
And
right.
and one thing that I didn't touch upon, which I think is important, is shame. I actually was surprised that when I had my mastectomy, I felt really shameful. My body had let me down. How my body looked at that time. It doesn't now. I've had an incredible reconstruction. It's beautiful in my opinion. But the reason I'm saying that is that is that importance of just treating yourself like a child in many ways, just giving that love and kindness towards yourself, and knowing, I mean, I just mentioned about the reconstruction and I just wondered, why did I say that? And now I remember why, is because, to use this as an analogy, when I had my mastectomy, I was absolutely mortified. I was 43, I had a big scar across my chest, that was it. I know it's a bit brutal, but that was the reality. And I know a lot of women go through that and a lot worse, yet that was my experience. And I looked down at that scar, and when the doctor took the patch off, and I burst into tears because I never thought I would feel whole again. And it took me going through that journey of reconstructive surgery and having a beautiful tattoo, which actually, ironically, is a magnolia and other things. And I'm saying that not to be self-centered around this, but just to say that something that can feel so tragic, so ugly, or whatever, however you see it, and so shameful, can be transformed into something beautiful. So that's what I wanted to say.
Thank you for sharing that. And I think we sort of touched upon that earlier, but it is, again, those darkest moments that can bring about the beauty in our life. And, thank you for sharing that story. I know it's not always easy to be so vulnerable about our experiences, but I do think it's important that we share these stories with people, because so many other women or men are going through their own form of their life shocks. And it's so important that they can see that, because when we're in the thick of it, when we're sort of in the beginning part of it, we feel like life is hopeless. We feel like we're never going to be able to get out of the situation. But it's so important, for people like yourself to share these stories, because it does give people hope, and it gives people, it can help people to see themselves in the experience, and to know that, if it was possible for someone like yourself to overcome it, then it gives them a little bit of a glimpse of hope that it's possible for themselves as well. And that's why I think it's so important, to share these stories, and to, you know, be honest about the experience and what you went through.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for saying that. I appreciate it, because sometimes you do, that vulnerability creeps in, but we need to be vulnerable really to heal as well. And the big thing that kept coming into my mind was the piece of, I think you said, what advice would you give, is the mantra of this too will pass. This too will pass. Because sometimes it feels like it won't, but it will, and it will get better. Yeah.
Yes. Oh, thank you so much. I really appreciate that. You mentioned earlier about some resources that you may have for the community, for the group. If you can
Yeah,
just tell us a little bit
absolutely.
more about that, and then so let us know how we can find you, maybe your website or email address.
Yeah. So my website is my website. It's Liz 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 Keats Keates.com. I think you might share it in the links. I'm not sure, but
I,
I'm on social media. I've got a Facebook group, Meant for More, Instagram, and the resources are. I've got a life purpose meditation. It's a very gentle inquiry set to some lovely music, and then a workbook which has, if you meant, I've been mentioning, as I said, of those is in there, which can be quite helpful in itself. I also have written a blog about my experience, and that's on my website. It's called, I'll say it's called The Tit Is Back, which is in reference to my boob. Cut that if you want to. But it's that whole journey around there, and it's kind of got, I think it's called The Tit Is Back, 8 Lessons Learned from a Cancer Diagnosis, Mastectomy and Beyond. So it's kind of sharing what I've learned in that process. And I don't know if there was anything else that I had as a giveaway. I do also do a masterclass called Life Shock to Life Shift. It would be good if I got that right, wouldn't it? Life Shock to Life Shift. So I think that's everything. I hope that wasn't too jumbled.
No, that's perfect. And I'll be sure to share those links in the notes as well to make it easier for everyone. But again, on that note, I really wanted to just say thank you for being here with me today, for sharing your story. I know there was a lot of valuable insights in what you shared with us today, and I know I have quite a few takeaways for myself, and I'm sure that the community will also appreciate some of these takeaways. So thank you again. I really do appreciate you sharing the story, and I hope to have you on the show again sometime, and we can chat about some other things, because I know, we have quite a few similar interests, and it would be great to sort of dive into another topic and learn and grow with you again.
Oh, absolutely. It's been absolute joy. And thank you so much. Heartfelt thank you for inviting me on here. It's just been absolutely lovely and beautiful. And I've got takeaways as well from our conversation. Yeah, so thank you so much. Really appreciate it. And you made me feel at ease. So that's really nice.
Thank you. I'm very happy with that. Thank you so much. Thank you for listening to this transformational episode of Awaken with Carla. I hope you found inspiration, guidance, and some practical tools that you can apply to your own life. As we come to an end of this episode, I wanted to take a moment to reflect on the wisdom that we've gained and the insights that we've discovered together. Remember that transformation is a journey, and it takes consistency, effort, and dedication to create the lasting changes. Here are my key takeaways from my conversation with Liz. First and most importantly, and this is something that I struggle with even till today, and something that I'm learning and constantly trying to improve on, is not to be so hard on ourselves. We go through many ups and downs in life, and so many times we are our own worst critics, that we make our situations worse just by simply how we treat ourselves and how we interact with ourselves. If you take a moment to listen to the thoughts that are sort of going on repeat, you'll know what I'm talking about. And so one of the things that I took away from this conversation is that I'm not alone in this experience or this journey. So many of us that are going through these major life shifts, we are often so hard on ourselves, and we need others to remind us that it's okay to not be so difficult, or it's okay to not be so hard on ourselves. So I invite you to welcome more compassion, more self-compassion into your own life, so that you can start to invite more of the healing and more of the change, because the harder we are on ourselves, the harder it becomes for us to create those lasting changes. Second thing that I learned, and this was actually more of a reminder for me because I had learned this many years ago, but I like how Liz phrased it in the way that your word is your wand. And so if we think of, magical fairies wand, and how, just by waving the wand, we can actually create or manifest anything. that is the same thing that can be said about the words that we use. So it's important for us to be mindful of our language and be mindful of the things that we say, whether out loud or we say to ourselves in our thoughts. So going back to the first point, if you take a moment to think about all the thoughts that are running through your mind, think of the words or pause and listen to the words that you're using. Listen to the words that you're using about yourself and about others. And that's another important thing to keep in mind, is that whatever we say about others, whenever we're casting judgment on others, we're really casting that judgment on ourselves. Because again, our word is our wand. We can create absolutely anything with the words that we utter from our mouth. And so it's important for us to be mindful of the words that we're using. The third thing that I learned from my conversation with Liz, and even from my own personal journey, is that the quieter we become, the more we actually hear. And although that sounds counterintuitive, it actually opens ourselves up to connecting with our higher self and hearing the guidance that we need from ourselves and from God or the creator, the universe, whatever resonates with you. When we're constantly tuning in to all the things around us, we're actually creating so much noise in our being that it's actually hard for us to hear what we truly need to hear. And so I invite you, as you're going through your healing journey, or if you're in the midst of a major life shock and you're not sure of where to go next, invite more quiet time into your life. Sit in meditation. And I know that word can be triggering for people because sometimes it's difficult to sit in a quiet place. But the purpose of meditation is not necessarily to not have any thoughts. I mean, I think that's impossible for us to do, but it's really to just invite that time and space of quietness, of stillness into your life, so that you can allow the right thoughts to come to the surface, or allow the right downloads to come to the surface. And so you can hear those messages and that guidance that you need in your life in order to take that next step forward, whatever that is, that may be for you. So the more we can invite that stillness and that quiet time into our life, the more information we actually get from our higher selves, from God, from the creator. And the more we can actually trust that the steps that we do take going forward are the right steps for us. Again, as you know, I'm always encouraging you to take this knowledge and the inspirations that you're getting from each of these episodes and integrate these into your life. Embrace some of the practices or the mindset shifts that resonate with you. And more importantly, make sure that you are patient with yourself as you navigate this journey. Remember that healing, self-discovery, spirituality is a lifelong pursuit. And I encourage you to continue exploring, learning, and growing in your own unique way. If you have any questions or you would like to share your experience, I would love to hear from you. So reach out to us through our website or social media channels. And remember that you're not alone on this journey. We're here to support you every step of the way. Before we wrap up, I wanted to express my deepest gratitude to this incredible guest speaker, Liz Keats. Her wisdom and her experience has enriched this episode and brought us so many valuable insights. If you'd like to learn more from her, I've included her information in the show notes, so make sure to check out those details below. Lastly, and as always, I'd like to thank you, our amazing listeners, for being a part of this community. Your support, your feedback, and your engagement means the world to me. And together, remember that we're creating a space for personal growth, connection, and transformation. If you've enjoyed this episode, please share it with your family and your friends, and make sure to leave me a comment or a review below. Your support really does mean a lot to me, and it helps me on my mission to empower individuals to live more fulfilling, authentic, and purposeful lives by helping them to tap into their inner wisdom and potential. Remember, the power to awaken and live your best life lies within you. You have everything you need to manifest your dreams and create a life full of purpose and meaning. Until next time, keep embracing your journey of self-discovery, nurturing your well-being, and awakening the extraordinary that lies within you. Stay tuned for more empowering episodes of Awaken with Carla. May you find peace, love, and light on your path.